In August 2021, the world was just glued to their screens, watching America's longest war come to this sudden, chaotic end. I mean, we're talking 20 years, $2 trillion, and thousands of lives. And the mission in Afghanistan didn't just end, it collapsed. So today, we're going to dig into how it all unraveled so quickly.
All right, first up, a mission collapses. To really get a grip on what happened, we're not starting at the beginning. No, we're jumping right into the thick of it, that unbelievably fast collapse of the Afghan government and military back in August 2021. Seriously, almost nobody saw it coming this quickly.
And when I say fast, I mean fast. This wasn't some slow, drawn-out fight. It was a blitz. Just look at this timeline. August 6th, the first provincial capital falls. Less than a week later, Kandahar and Herat, the country's second and third biggest cities, are gone. Then Mazar-e-Sharif, and by August 15th, they were in Kabul. It was like a domino effect in real time, and that sheer speed is what left everyone absolutely stunned.
And then boom, on August 15th, the president, Ashraf Ghani, he just leaves the country. The Taliban walk into the presidential palace and they declare the war is over. Just like that, the entire government structure that had been in place for 20 years, it was gone, vanished. This created a massive power vacuum, and you can just imagine the panic that ripped through a city of 5 million people.
And of course, behind all the political news, there's the real human story. The cost was just immediate and devastating. This one quote from a woman in Kabul, man, it just hits you. "Now I have to burn everything I achieved." Think about that. The feeling that everything you've worked for, all the progress an entire generation had seen, could just be erased in a single day. It's heartbreaking.
Okay, Section 2, 20 years to withdraw. So the big question is, how? How did a 2-decade-long international mission end this way? To figure that out, we've got to go back, way back, to the beginning.
You know, it's really crucial to remember why this whole thing started. This wasn't originally about building a new country. After 9/11, the mission, called Operation Enduring Freedom, had a very clear, very specific goal. Go into Afghanistan, destroy al-Qaeda's training camps, and get their leaders. That's it. It was a direct response, a counterterrorism mission.
So this wasn't some sudden decision, right? The withdrawal was the end of a very long and complicated story. You can see it here. The invasion starts in 2001. A whole decade later, in 2011, Osama bin Laden is killed. That was a huge turning point. After that, the mission kind of shifts. NATO formally ends its combat role in 2014. Then in 2020, the US and the Taliban actually sign an agreement setting a date to leave. And finally, in 2021, President Biden announces the final pullout. This thing crossed multiple presidencies.
Which brings us to Section 3, chaos at the airport. Because what was supposed to be this orderly, planned exit, well, it turned into anything but. It spiraled into one of the most frantic and dangerous evacuations we've seen in modern history.
And you have to understand, the confidence level from the top was high. Just listen to this quote from President Biden on July 8th, just over a month before the collapse. He said there was going to be no circumstance where you'd see people being airlifted off an embassy roof. He was adamant it wasn't going to be another Vietnam. But what happened on the ground told a very different story.
And wouldn't you know it, the comparisons to Saigon became instant and impossible to ignore. The images were just eerily similar. Helicopters taking off from the embassy compound, desperate people clinging to planes. It was this powerful, painful moment of history repeating itself, and those images are what's burned into everyone's memory.
So what was the plan originally? Well, it was based on the idea that things would stay pretty stable. The plan was to leave just 650 U.S. troops behind. That's it, just a small security force for the embassy.
But that plan went right out the window. As the Afghan army basically disappeared, the number of troops needed just exploded. Instead of 650, suddenly they had to send around 6,000 troops back in, almost 10 times the original number. And they weren't there to fight a war. They were there just to hold one single airport so people could get out.
And then, the absolute worst happened. The chaos at the airport gates became a target. A suicide bomber from ISIS-K, and remember, they're enemies of the Taliban too, attacked the crowds. The blast was horrific. At least 170 Afghans were killed, and 13 U.S. service members lost their lives. It was the deadliest day for the U.S. military in Afghanistan in a decade.
And if that wasn't tragic enough, it was followed by a terrible mistake. In the scramble to prevent another attack, the U.S. launched a drone strike on what they thought was another ISIS-K threat. But the intelligence was bad. It was wrong. The strike killed 10 innocent civilians, an aid worker, and 7 children.
just a heartbreaking final error in a 20-year war.
Okay, let's move on to Section 4. The world reacts. As you can imagine, as all this was happening, the entire world was watching, and the reactions came flooding in from everywhere.
And the response was all over the place. I mean, completely fractured. You had key U.S. allies, like former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair, calling it imbecilic. The sitting Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, blamed the U.S. You even had dissent from the top of the U.S. military itself, with General Milley saying he advised against it. And then, in a really strange twist, you had extremist groups on the far right actually cheering for the Taliban. It was a moment that just defied all the usual political lines.
And that brings us to our final section, a contested legacy. Because when the dust settled, what we're left with is this incredibly complicated and controversial legacy of America's longest war, and a huge debate about whether this was the right way to end it.
And that frustration, it wasn't just in Washington or on TV. It was coming from inside the military. Take this quote from a Marine officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller. He posted a video demanding accountability, and it just went viral. It perfectly captured this raw anger and discontent within the ranks, and it kicked off this huge call for leaders to own the results.
This really gets to the heart of the whole thing, right? The forever war debate. On one side, you have the argument for leaving. Hey, the original mission was to get al-Qaeda. That's done. Why are we still there, stuck in this endless, costly war? But the other side, the argument for staying, was that a small number of troops was actually working. It was keeping the Taliban in check, and, just as importantly, it was protecting huge gains in things like healthcare, electricity, and education. But for a lot of people, all that strategic debate felt secondary, because the most immediate and maybe the most devastating consequence was what happened to Afghanistan's women and girls. Almost overnight, the Taliban started rolling back 20 years of progress. Girls were barred from high school and college, women were pushed out of jobs. Their ability to just move freely was taken away. It was a brutal reversal.
And so we're left with this one big, lingering question. After 2 decades, what really is the true cost of ending a forever war? There are no easy answers here. The withdrawal from Afghanistan really forces us to look at the massive, complex trade-offs involved in ending these long conflicts. It's a tough legacy, and one that people are going to be talking about for a very, very long time.